The stars twinkled coldly in the black emptiness of space around the Centauri expanse. This region, once busy with trading ships and peaceful travelers, was now filled with war. The sleek, metal bodies of coalition warships formed a tight circle around the small Proxima station. Their hulls shone with a blue-white glow under the light of distant stars. Hundreds of smaller fighter ships zipped between the larger vessels like busy insects. Admiral Vex walked slowly across the command deck of his flagship, the Dominion. His tall, thin body moved with careful steps. The hard outer shell that covered his body clicked slightly with each movement. His forearms were folded behind his back, and his large, compound eyes reflected the glow of the screens around him. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, afraid to make any mistakes that might anger their leader. Vex stopped at the main viewing window and looked out at his fleet. 20 years of fighting had led to this moment. 20 years of chasing the annoying resistance forces across the stars. Now, finally, they had nowhere else to run. "Status report," Vex said, his voice a low rumble. Sora, his diplomatic liaison, approached with a data pad in her hands. Unlike Vex, Sora had a soft, blue-tinted skin and large, round eyes. Her people, the Larians, were known for their skill in talking and making peace. But in this war, her job was mostly to explain the Admiral's demands to those who surrendered. "The resistance forces are completely surrounded," Sora said, her voice soft but clear. "They've retreated to their final defensive position around Proxima Station. Their shields are at 30% power. They have enough food and air for perhaps 3 more days." Vex's mouthparts moved in what passed for a smile among his kind. "Excellent. After 20 years of conflict, the Coalition will finally bring order to this chaotic sector. Prepare the final attack plan. I want to end this by tomorrow." Sora nodded, but there was sadness in her eyes. She had seen too many worlds fall, too many people die or be forced to live under Coalition rule. But she kept these thoughts hidden and returned to her station. Inside Proxima Station, the mood was dark. The station, once a busy trading post, was now packed with the last fighters of the resistance. The metal walls were dented and scratched from years of hasty repairs. The air smelled of too many bodies and not enough cleaning. The lights flickered occasionally as the power systems struggled to keep up. Commander Hannah Lee stood in the control room, looking at the big screen that showed the enemy ships. Her dark hair was tied back tightly, and her face showed the tiredness of someone who had been fighting too long. But her eyes still burned with determination. "They've almost completely closed the circle," said her second-in-command Da. He pointed to a small gap in the enemy line. "This last escape route will be gone in an hour." Hannah nodded. She had known this was coming. For the past year, the resistance had been pushed back from system to system. Their allies had fallen one by one. Their ships had been destroyed or captured. Now, all that remained were about 500 fighters and this old, damaged station. "What about the distress calls we sent?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Day shook his head. "No response. The nearest friendly forces are in the Rigel system. They could never get here in time, even if they had ships to spare, which they don't." Hannah sighed and ran a hand over her face. She looked around the control room at her people. They were tired, scared, but still working, still fighting. She owed them the truth. "Call everyone to the main hall," she said. "They deserve to know where we stand." 20 minutes later, Hannah stood on a small platform in the station's largest room. Hundreds of faces looked up at her: humans, Centaurians, Proxians, and a dozen other species who had joined the resistance. They were a mix of professional soldiers and ordinary people who had taken up arms when the Coalition came to their homes. "Friends," Hannah began, her voice carrying across the quiet room, "I won't lie to you. We are in a very bad position. The Coalition has us surrounded. Help is not coming. Our supplies are running low." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some faces showed fear, others anger. "But," Hannah continued, raising her voice, "we still have our weapons. We still have our skills. And most importantly, we still have what we've been fighting for all these years, our freedom, our right to live as we choose. She stood straighter, her voice growing stronger. The coalition thinks we will surrender. They think we will give up. They don't understand what we're fighting for. They don't understand that some things are worth dying for. The crowd grew quieter, all eyes fixed on her. We fight to the last, she told them, her voice now firm and clear. For our homes, for our freedom, for those who will come after us. If this is our final stand, then let it be one the coalition will never forget. A cheer rose from the crowd, a sound of defiance in the face of certain defeat. For a moment, Hannah allowed herself to feel proud of these brave souls. Then she returned to the control room to plan their final defense. Hours passed as they prepared. Weapons were checked. Fighters were positioned. Final messages were sent to loved ones far away. The mood was solemn but determined. Day was checking the communications system when he suddenly straightened up. "Commander," he called, his voice strange. "I'm picking up a transmission. It's not from any of our allies." Hannah moved quickly to his side. "The coalition?" "No," Daz said, adjusting the controls. "It's coming from beyond the system. I've never seen a signal pattern like this." The speakers crackled, and then a clear, confident voice filled the control room. "Resistance forces at Proxima Station. This is the Terran vessel Invictus. Hold your position. We are inbound to your location. Repeat, hold your position." A stunned silence fell over the control room. Earth, or Terra as some called it, was a distant planet that had stayed out of the galactic conflicts. They had decent technology, but nothing that could match the coalition's power. And they certainly didn't have ships that could travel quickly enough to reach the Centauri expanse in time. "It must be a trick," one of the officers said. "The coalition trying to make us lower our guard." But Hannah wasn't so sure. There was something about the voice, something real and solid that gave her pause. "Can we respond?" she asked Da. He nodded and opened the channel. "This is Commander Hannah Lee of the Resistance Forces. Identify yourself and state your intentions." The response came back immediately. "Commander Lee, this is Captain June of the Terran Defense Force. We've been monitoring the coalition's expansion. Earth has decided it's time to take a side. We're bringing help. Our new drive technology will have us at your position in less than an hour. Just hold on a little longer." For the first time in months, a small smile appeared on Hannah's face. Perhaps this wasn't the end after all. Perhaps it was just the beginning of something new. "All defense teams," she called over the station speakers. "Prepare for possible reinforcements. We hold this position. We hold until help arrives." On the flagship of the coalition fleet, the science officer Wook stood very still. His three-fingered hands hovered over his control panel. The screens in front of him showed readings that made no sense. Energy levels were climbing rapidly at the edge of the system, beyond the outer planets. These were not normal readings. Not like a ship coming out of standard faster-than-light travel. This was something else entirely. "Sir," Wook said, turning to his supervisor, "you need to see this." The lead physicist, Dr. Bin, hurried over. His tall, thin body bent over the screens. His eyes widened as he took in the data. Without speaking, he pressed a button on his wrist device. "Connect me to Admiral Vex," he said. Now, on the command deck, Admiral Vex was planning the final attack on the resistance station when his communication device buzzed. He answered with an annoyed click of his mandibles. "This had better be important," he said. "Admiral, something is happening," Dr. Bin reported, his voice trembling. "There are energy readings at the system's edge. These readings defy all known laws of physics. The power levels are beyond anything we've ever recorded." Vex straightened up. "Show me." The main view screen on the command deck switched to show the empty space near the system's edge. At first, there was nothing to see. Just stars and darkness. Then, a tiny point of light appeared. It grew quickly, becoming a swirling circle of blue-white energy. "What am I looking at?" Vex demanded. "I don't know," Dr. Bin admitted. It's like space itself is being folded somehow." The circle of energy expanded. Inside it was not the blackness of space, but a tunnel of swirling light. The energy readings went off the charts. Alarms began to sound throughout the flagship. "Is it a weapon?" Vex asked, his voice sharp with concern. "I don't think so," Dr. Bin replied. "It's more like a door." As they watched, the swirling energy stabilized. Space itself seemed to fold inward, creating a luminous tear in the fabric of reality. The tear grew larger and larger until it was big enough for a ship to pass through. And then a ship did pass through. From the impossible breach emerged a sleek warship. It was unlike any vessel Vex had ever seen. Its hull was smooth and dark, with few visible weapons, but it moved with a grace that suggested tremendous power. On its side was a simple marking, the blue and green circle that represented Earth. The tear in space closed behind the ship, leaving no trace that it had ever existed. "Impossible," whispered Dr. Bin. "No known technology can do what we just saw." 80,000 kilometers away, on the bridge of the Invictus, Captain Jae-yun Kim held tightly to the arms of her command chair as the ship completed its jump. The quantum fold drive made conventional travel methods look like walking compared to flying. But it was not a smooth ride. The entire ship had shaken violently as they passed through the fold in space-time. Now, as the drive powered down, the shaking stopped. Captain Kim looked around at her crew. Many looked pale or sick, but all were at their stations, doing their duties. "Status report," she ordered, her voice steady despite the lingering dizziness she felt. Her first officer, Tai-ho Park, checked his screens. He was a tall man with short black hair and steady hands. Unlike most of the crew, he seemed completely unfazed by the jump. "Jump successful, Captain," he announced. "All systems operational. The quantum fold drive is cooling down as expected. We've arrived exactly where we planned." "And outside?" Captain Kim asked. "Coalition forces detected," Park replied. "A lot of them. They're surrounding a space station that must be Proxima. We made it just in time." Captain Kim nodded. This was their first real mission with the new drive, and it had worked perfectly. Earth had spent years developing the technology in secret, watching as the Coalition expanded its control across this sector of space. They had hoped to avoid conflict, but the reports of Coalition cruelty had finally become too much to ignore. "Any reaction from the Coalition fleet?" she asked. "They've seen us," Park confirmed. "Several ships are changing course to investigate. Their scanners are trying to analyze us, but our hull plating is working as designed. They can't see through it." Captain Kim allowed herself a small smile. "Good. Open a channel to the resistance station. Let's let them know help has arrived." Back on the Coalition flagship, Admiral Vex watched the strange ship on his view screen. His initial shock had been replaced by calculation. Yes, the ship had appeared in an unusual way. Yes, its technology was clearly advanced, but it was still just one ship against his fleet of hundreds. "What do we know about it?" he asked his tactical officer. "Very little, sir," the officer replied. "It's definitely from Earth, based on the markings. But our scanners can't penetrate their hull. We can't tell what weapons they have, how many crew, or even what's powering the ship." Vex scoffed and waved a dismissive hand. "A single ship? What do these humans think they can accomplish against our armada? Even with their fancy entrance, they're still just humans. Weak, soft creatures." His chief strategist, a veteran of many campaigns named Ruck, looked less certain. He studied the image of the Earth ship with narrowed eyes. "Sir," he said hesitantly, "I don't think we should underestimate them. The way they arrived, no one has that technology. No one should have that technology. It should be impossible to fold space like that." "Impossible or not, they did it," Vex replied. But one ship can't change the outcome of this battle. Sir, our sensors can't penetrate their hull, Ruck pressed. This technology is unlike anything we've encountered. We don't know what they're capable of. Vex clicked his mandibles in irritation. Fine. Send 3 destroyers to intercept this human vessel. Tell them to demand surrender, and if refused, to destroy it. That should tell us what they're capable of. As the orders went out, the mood on the command deck was tense. Many of the officers had seen the impossible arrival of the Earth ship, and they weren't as confident as their admiral. On the Invictus, Captain Kim received a report of the approaching coalition destroyers. They're moving into attack formation, Park told her. Standard coalition tactics. They'll surround us and attack from 3 directions. Captain Kim nodded. Just as we expected. Are our systems ready? Yes, Captain, Park confirmed. All defensive and offensive systems are online. The crew is at battle stations. Good, Kim said. She looked at the tactical display showing the 3 coalition destroyers growing closer. They were powerful ships, each capable of destroying a small moon. Against conventional vessels, they would be overwhelming. But the Invictus was not a conventional vessel. Let's show the coalition what humanity can do, Captain Kim said calmly. Prepare all systems. When they make their move, we'll make ours. As the coalition destroyers closed in, neither they nor Admiral Vex realized that this moment would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The impossible jump was just the beginning of the impossible things the humans were about to do. The communications officer on the Invictus looked up from her station. Captain, all systems are ready. We can broadcast on all coalition frequencies. Captain Jae-yun Kim nodded. She sat straight in her command chair, her dark uniform neat despite the rough journey through the quantum fold. She took a moment to gather her thoughts. This would be humanity's first official contact with the coalition forces. The words she chose now would matter. Open the channel, she ordered. The communications officer pressed several buttons on her console. Channel open, Captain. You're broadcasting to all coalition ships. Captain Kim took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was clear and strong. This is Captain Jae-yun Kim of the Earth vessel Invictus. We have monitored your aggression against peaceful worlds. We request immediate cessation of hostilities. Her message echoed across every coalition ship in the system. On fighter craft and massive battleships, alien crews heard the human voice speaking in the standard galactic language. On the flagship Dominion, Admiral Vex was sitting in his command chair when the message came through. His antenna twitched in surprise at the boldness of the human captain. They dare to make demands, he said, his voice sharp with anger. Put me through to them. The communications officer quickly established a connection. Admiral Vex didn't pause to consider his words. His response was immediate and harsh. Human vessel, you have entered a restricted military zone. Surrender your ship or face destruction. There was a brief pause before Captain Kim's voice came back over the channel. Her tone remained calm, as if she were discussing the weather rather than facing a fleet of warships. We decline, Captain Kim replied. The simple response made Admiral Vex click his mandibles together in fury. He stood up from his command chair and pointed at the tactical officer. Fire a warning volley. Show them what they're facing. The tactical officer hesitated for just a second. Sir, we still don't know their capabilities. Do it, Vex shouted. The officer quickly entered commands into his console. 3 of the nearest coalition destroyers adjusted their positions. Their main weapons, powerful energy cannons that could cut through most ships like paper, powered up with a high-pitched whine. Firing, sir, the tactical officer reported. Bright blue energy beams shot from the 3 destroyers. They crossed the empty space between the ships in less than a second, aimed to pass close to the Invictus without hitting it directly. It was a standard warning tactic, meant to show power without causing damage. But something unexpected happened. As the energy beams approached the Invictus, a shimmering field appeared around the human ship. The field glowed with rainbow colors, like oil on water. When the Coalition beams hit this field, they didn't pass through or explode. Instead, they simply faded away. The energy dissipated harmlessly against the iridescent shield. On the Dominion's bridge, there was stunned silence. "What just happened?" Admiral Vex demanded. "Report." The science officer checked his readings twice before answering. "Sir, they have some kind of energy-absorbing shield. It completely neutralized our weapons. We've never seen this technology before." Aboard the Invictus, Captain Kim watched the failed attack on her view screen. The shield had performed exactly as designed. Earth scientists had spent years developing defenses against Coalition weapons, studying recordings of past battles. "Shield performance at 98%, reported the defense officer. "No damage." Captain Kim nodded. "They've made their choice. Now we make ours." She turned to her tactical officer. "Target their weapon systems. Precision strikes only. No casualties if we can avoid it." The tactical officer, a young man named Yoon, quickly programmed the targeting computers. "Targets acquired, Captain. Ready to fire." "Proceed," ordered Captain Kim. The Invictus suddenly moved. Despite its size, the ship changed position with incredible speed and grace. Smaller weapon ports opened along its hull. Instead of the broad energy beams the Coalition used, the Invictus fired thin, focused beams of intense green light. Each beam hit exactly where it was aimed. On the first Coalition destroyer, the main weapon housing was sliced open with surgical precision. On the second, the power conduits leading to the weapons were severed. The third had its targeting systems completely disabled. All of this happened in less than 60 seconds. The Coalition ships drifted, their main weapon systems completely disabled. They could still move and communicate, but they could no longer fight effectively. On the Dominion, Admiral Vex watched in disbelief as 3 of his destroyers were effectively neutered by a single Earth ship. "Impossible," he whispered. Then, louder, "How did they do that? Those were our newest destroyers." No one on the bridge had an answer for him. The tactical displays showed the damage clearly. Precise hits that disabled weapons without causing major structural damage or casualties. "Sir," the tactical officer said hesitantly, "they could have destroyed those ships completely. They chose not to." This realization only made Admiral Vex angrier. "They're toying with us. Send in the next wave. All ships, full attack formation." Meanwhile, on Proxima Station, Commander Hannah Lee and her crew watched the battle unfold on their long-range scanners. They had expected to see the Earth ship quickly destroyed by the overwhelming Coalition forces. Instead, they were witnessing something miraculous. "The Invictus just disabled 3 Coalition destroyers," reported Da, disbelief in his voice. "They didn't even scratch the human ship." Commander Hannah moved closer to the main view screen. She had fought against Coalition ships for years. She knew how powerful they were, how difficult they were to damage even with a well-coordinated attack by multiple vessels. "How are they doing that?" she asked, her voice filled with wonder. "Those destroyers have the strongest armor in the Coalition fleet. And did you see how the Invictus moved? Nothing that size should be able to change direction so quickly. Their technology is far beyond anything we've seen," they replied. "Beyond anything the Coalition has too, apparently." A spark of hope began to grow in Commander Hannah's chest. For years, the Resistance had been fighting a losing battle against the technologically superior Coalition. But now, suddenly, there was a new player on the field. A player with technology that made the Coalition's fearsome weapons look outdated. "Send a message to Captain Kim," Hannah ordered. "Tell her we're ready to coordinate our defenses with the Invictus." And she paused, a small smile forming on her lips. "Tell her thank you from all of us." As Dai sent the message, the staff on the command deck of Proxima Station watched the Invictus with new eyes. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to believe that maybe, just maybe, they weren't fighting a hopeless war after all. And in the deep space between Proxima Station and the Coalition fleet, the Invictus continued its dance, a single ship defying an armada, showing the galaxy that humanity had arrived. Admiral Vex stared at the viewscreen on his command deck. 3 of his best destroyers floated in space, their weapons systems completely disabled by a single enemy ship. A ship from Earth, a planet that had stayed out of galactic wars until now. His large eyes narrowed, and his mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of extreme anger among his species. "Enough games," he hissed. "All ships, converge on the human vessel." The order spread quickly through the coalition fleet. 30 warships, destroyers, cruisers, and battle carriers broke from their positions around Proxima Station. They moved into a classic coalition attack formation, a 3-dimensional net designed to trap and destroy any enemy. "They're coming at us with everything, Captain," reported First Officer Park on the Invictus Bridge. His voice remained calm despite the danger approaching them. Captain Jae-yun Kim studied the tactical display. 30 ships against 1 were terrible odds by any normal measure, but the Invictus was not a normal ship. "Let them come," she said. Her hands moved across the control panel built into her command chair. "Activate modular reconfiguration. Prepare counter-offensive protocols." "Modular reconfiguration activating," confirmed the ship's systems officer. "All crew secure for transformation." Throughout the Invictus, crew members quickly strapped themselves into special seats. This wasn't their first transformation, but it was their first in actual combat. Outside, the smooth hull of the Invictus began to change. What had appeared to be solid metal started to shift and move. Large sections of the ship's outer layer slid past each other, locked into new positions, and then changed shape again. Weapons that had been hidden beneath the surface emerged. Other sections expanded or contracted. The entire silhouette of the vessel changed from a sleek, arrow-like shape to something more like a star, with multiple extending arms. In the coalition fleet, targeting officers watched in confusion as their computers struggled to keep up with the changes. "Sir, the human vessel is changing shape," reported a junior officer to Captain Moon, who commanded one of the lead coalition cruisers. "What do you mean, changing shape?" Captain Moon demanded. "Its configuration is completely different now. Our targeting systems can't get a solid lock because the reference points keep moving." Captain Moon stared at his screen. "Keep trying. Fire when ready." The coalition ships opened fire. Energy beams and plasma torpedoes shot toward the Invictus from multiple directions. It should have been impossible to dodge or block them all. But the Invictus didn't try to dodge. Instead, it continued to reconfigure itself. As the coalition weapons approached, specific sections of the hull shifted to present the strongest shields exactly where needed. Other sections turned to present weapons. "Sir," called the tactical officer on Captain Moon's cruiser, "their AI is adapting to our attack patterns. It's anticipating our moves before we execute them." This was the true power of the Invictus, not just its advanced technology, but the artificial intelligence that controlled it. Earth scientists had created an AI system that could process information and react thousands of times faster than any living crew. It learned from every shot fired, every maneuver made, constantly improving its responses. On the Invictus Bridge, Captain Kim watched the battle unfold with intense focus. The ship's AI handled most of the moment-to-moment defensive actions, but overall strategy remained her responsibility. "Forward shields at 80%, reported the defense officer. "Minor damage to Section 5. Self-repair systems active." "Good," Captain Kim said. "Execute Pattern Delta. Target their propulsion systems next." The Invictus suddenly accelerated, moving directly toward the center of the coalition formation. This was the opposite of what conventional tactics would suggest. Most ships would try to stay away from being surrounded. The Invictus was deliberately flying into the trap. "They're crazy," shouted Captain Moon as he watched the human ship charge toward them. "All ships, concentrate fire." But the Invictus was moving too fast, its course unpredictable as it continued to reconfigure itself. It slipped between 2 coalition cruisers, firing its precision weapons as it passed. Green beams sliced through engine sections and power relays. The cruisers didn't explode. That wasn't the Invictus's goal. Instead, they simply lost power and drifted. The human ship continued through the Coalition formation, its weapons striking with devastating efficiency, where Coalition vessels relied on overwhelming firepower, trying to simply destroy their enemies completely. The human ship utilized precision and unpredictability. It disabled rather than destroyed, and it moved in ways that made no sense according to standard battle doctrines. 5 more Coalition ships lost power. 3 others spun out of control with damaged navigation systems. The carefully planned attack formation fell apart as ships tried to avoid colliding with each other. On Proxima Station, Commander Hannah Lee watched the battle with growing excitement. The tactical display showed something she had never thought possible: the mighty Coalition fleet in disarray. Ships moving in confusion, unable to coordinate their attacks against the single Earth vessel. "This is our chance," she said suddenly, turning to her officers. "The Coalition is focused on the Invictus. They've pulled most of their ships away from us." "What are you suggesting?" asked Da. "We don't have many ships left, and the ones we have are damaged." "We have enough," Hannah said firmly. "And they don't need to be in perfect condition for what I'm planning." She pressed the station-wide communication button. "All pilots to your ships. This is not a drill. We're launching everything we have." Throughout Proxima Station, resistance fighters rushed to their vessels. Some were proper military ships, old and battle-worn. Others were modified civilian craft with weapons attached. But all were piloted by people who had fought the Coalition for years, who knew their tactics and weaknesses. "Target their command vessels," Hannah ordered as she strapped herself into her own fighter. "The Invictus is keeping their main force busy. We go after their leadership." 20 minutes later, almost 100 small resistance ships poured out of Proxima Station's launch bays. They flew in tight, practiced formations, heading straight for the rear of the Coalition fleet where the command ships were positioned. Admiral Vex was so focused on trying to destroy the Invictus that he didn't notice the resistance attack until it was too late. The smaller ships slipped past the distracted outer defenses and launched targeted strikes against the Coalition command vessels. The coordinated assault caught the Coalition fleet in complete disarray. Their rigid battle doctrine, which relied on precise formations and overwhelming force, crumbled against the combined human and resistance adaptability. Coalition officers, trained to follow specific protocols, didn't know how to respond when those protocols failed. For the first time in 20 years of conflict, the mighty Coalition fleet was losing a battle, and Admiral Vex knew exactly who to blame: the impossible human ship that had appeared from nowhere and changed everything. The command deck of the Dominion was silent except for the occasional beep of warning signals. Smoke drifted from damaged control panels. The bright lights that normally lit the room had dimmed to emergency levels, casting long shadows across the floor. Admiral Vex stood very still, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides. His eyes were fixed on the tactical display floating in the center of the room. The display told a story that no Coalition officer had ever seen before: defeat. A third of his mighty fleet drifted powerless through space, their weapons and engines disabled by the human ship's precise attacks. Another third was locked in desperate battle with the suddenly aggressive resistance fighters. Several command ships had taken serious damage. And now, the human vessel Invictus hovered directly in front of the Dominion, close enough that Vex could see every detail of its strange, shifting hull through the viewports. "Sir," his communications officer said quietly, "the human ship is hailing us again." Vex continued to stare at the tactical display. In his long career, he had never lost a battle. The Coalition's superior technology and disciplined forces had always prevailed. Until today. Until this human ship appeared from nowhere with technology that shouldn't exist. "Sir," the officer prompted again, "should I ignore them?" Vex finally turned away from the display. He looked around at his bridge crew. Tired, frightened, but still at their posts. They deserved better than to die in a pointless last stand. "Open channel," he finally ordered, his voice rough. The main view screen changed to show the bridge of the Invictus. It was smaller than the Dominion's command deck, with fewer crew members. At the center sat Captain Jae-yun Kim in her command chair. She looked calm and composed, as though she were having a normal day rather than fighting a battle that changed the course of galactic history. "Admiral," Captain Kim greeted him with a small nod. "I believe it's time we discuss terms." Vex's mandibles clicked together in frustration. "Terms? You mean surrender?" "I mean an end to this unnecessary conflict," Kim replied. "No more lives need to be lost today." Vex straightened his tall body to its full height. Even in defeat, he would maintain his dignity. "You've won a single battle," Vex retorted. "The Coalition spans hundreds of systems. We have thousands of ships, millions of soldiers. Do you think one victory changes anything?" Captain Kim's expression remained calm, but a small smile appeared on her lips. "The Invictus is merely the first," she replied. "Earth has completed construction of our fleet. Each vessel carries the quantum fold drive. Your territorial advantages are now obsolete." She pressed a button on her chair, and the screen split to show a series of images. Massive shipyards orbiting Earth, where dozens of vessels similar to the Invictus were in various stages of completion. Some were already finished, their crews training for deployment. "The distance between systems no longer matters," Kim continued. "Our ships can reach any point in Coalition space within hours. Your empire is built on the assumption that reinforcements take weeks or months to arrive. That advantage is gone." Vex felt a cold sensation spread through his body as he understood the full implications of what she was saying. The Coalition's strength had always been based on its ability to control vast regions of space, to move forces between systems faster than its enemies. If the humans could truly fold space as they claimed. "What do you want?" Vex asked, his voice quieter now. "An immediate ceasefire throughout this sector," Kim said. "A withdrawal of Coalition forces from Proxima Station and the surrounding systems. And within 10 standard days, a peace conference with representatives from all affected worlds, including the Resistance." Vex wanted to refuse. Every instinct trained into him over decades of military service screamed to continue fighting. But the tactical reality was clear. Even if he somehow destroyed the Invictus, more human ships would come. And next time, they might not be so careful to avoid casualties. "I will need to consult with Coalition High Command," Vex said stiffly. "Of course," Kim nodded. "You have 2 hours. We will maintain our current position until then." The screen went dark. Vex slowly walked back to his command chair and sat down. For the first time in 20 years of conflict, he would be sending a message of defeat rather than victory. 5 days later, representatives from across the sector gathered on a neutral space station that orbited a small, uninhabited planet. The station was simple and functional, with none of the grand architecture that marked Coalition government buildings or the makeshift practicality of Resistance bases. It was a fresh start, a neutral ground. In the main conference chamber, delegates from 20 different worlds sat at a circular table. Coalition representatives in their stiff, formal uniforms sat opposite Resistance leaders in their more practical attire. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Captain Jae-yun Kim entered the chamber, accompanied by her first officer, Tae-ho Park, and 2 other Earth representatives. They wore simple blue uniforms with the Earth insignia, the blue and green circle that represented their home planet. All eyes turned to the humans as they took their places at the table. Many of the delegates had never seen a human before. They studied Kim with curiosity and, in many cases, newfound respect. "Thank you all for coming," Kim began, her voice clear in the quiet room. "This meeting represents an opportunity to end a conflict that has caused suffering across this sector for too long." She turned to look at both the Coalition and Resistance delegates. "We propose a new accord, one based on mutual respect and cooperation rather than dominance. The Coalition's expansion must end, and the independence of worlds that wish to govern themselves must be recognized." A coalition diplomat started to object, but Kim continued before he could speak. In return, Earth offers to share some of our technological advances with all parties. Not weapons, but medical technology, agricultural improvements, and eventually, limited versions of our faster transportation systems. The room erupted in discussion. Some voices were angry, others excited. The offer of human technology was unexpected and appealing to many. Earth had kept to itself for centuries, developing in isolation while observing the wider galaxy. Now they were offering to share the fruits of that development. As the delegates debated, a young Earth officer approached Captain Kim and whispered something in her ear. Kim's eyes widened slightly, and she nodded in acknowledgement. The message was brief but significant. The second wave of quantum-fold vessels had completed final testing. 10 more ships like the Invictus were ready for deployment. They would arrive in this sector within days, a clear demonstration of Earth's new power. Kim didn't share this information with the delegates. There was no need for threats or shows of force now. The message from Earth only confirmed what she already knew. Her people were committed to this new path. After centuries of watching from the sidelines, humanity had stepped onto the galactic stage. As the noise in the room gradually settled into more organized discussion, Kim watched the delegates begin the slow work of building peace. It would not be easy. Centuries of distrust and decades of open conflict could not be erased in a day or even a year. But it had begun. Humanity had arrived, bringing not just new technology, but new ideas, new ways of solving problems, new hope for those who had none. And nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same again. The end.